Perfect. Just confirming that stream is working all right.
Lovely. Alright, sweet as. So congratulations everyone for making it to Sunday of Nats. I'm sure you guys are all feeling really, really hyped. Keep going. So the motion for this round is as follows. This House supports affirmative action for men in professions where they are significantly underrepresented, e.g. teaching, nursing, and social work. Speaking times are 7 to 8 minutes, so I'll give you one clap at 1 minute to signify the opening of POIs, 1 at 7 to signify the closing of POIs, and 2 at 8 to signify the end of your speaking time. Replies are half of this, so 3 to 4 minutes, 1 clap at 3, 2 at 4. Do we have any other questions before we get started? No? Beautiful. Sweet as. Without further ado then, I'll invite the first speaker of the affirmative team to start out this morning's debate.
I think that a world where care roles are staffed largely by women is a world where these roles and the work they do is undervalued, is understaffed, and that work, that of caring, that of emotional connection is ignored by men in their home and in the rest of their lives. I think that is a world that we must try to change the best we can. I'm going to start with some setup and 2 points for you. Firstly, on why I think we solve worker shortages in these roles, and secondly, why I think we change social narratives about caring and make men actually do it. Okay, starting then with some setup. Firstly, why don't we think men currently largely do a lot of these caring jobs? I think that there's a societal narrative that tells them that these jobs that are caring are feminist roles. I think firstly, they are pushed when they are in school by their guidance counsellors, by their teachers, that if they're good at chemistry, if they're good at maths, they don't tell them go and be a nurse, go to medical school. If they're good at English and connecting with people and have emotional intelligence, they don't get told go and be a care worker. They get told go and study English university, go into chemical engineering. I think secondly, that when they are growing up, when they are young, the things that they are given chemistry kits, they're given science kits, whereas girls get dolls. They're told, but the men that they see in picture books are all scientists or all firefighters. They're told from the start that the roles that men do are not ones that look like this. And thirdly, I think on social media, they are told by right-wing manosphere influencers that to do these roles is fundamentally not to be a man. It is to give up some of your masculinity. Okay. Second piece of setup then, why do I think that there are worker shortages in almost all of these roles? I think this is firstly because men don't go into these roles as I told you, which means there's just a bunch of people that we lose out on ever considering doing these roles. I think secondly, that lots of women also don't want to go into these roles because they're seen as feminists, because there is a narrative in society recently about women wanting to break barriers and not just go and do the thing that they see as a thing that women have always done for the last 100 years, thus they also avoid these roles. And I think that thirdly, that these roles, because they are fundamentally seen as female, are historically undervalued in society. They are not seen as crucial work, right? I think they are underpaid and not emphasised as much as the work that is traditionally done by men, which is far more visible, and thus people are more likely to go into it. I'll take that POI now.
Okay, do you think society incentivises men to take handouts?
Do I think society incentivises men to take handouts? Well, okay. I'm going to explain to you in a moment what affirmative action is most likely to look like, but I don't think it's going to look like cash handouts because it's not going to be very effective, and so I don't think that really matters. Okay, what is affirmative action most likely to look like? Note that I don't think there are necessarily competitive barriers to men entering these roles in the same way that we might see of places for Harvard, which is why we set some of them aside for women when we do affirmative action in this case. I don't think there's a shortage of access to be able to train as a care worker that men are fundamentally barred from getting. I think the reason that men don't enter these roles is because they don't want to, because of these societal narratives that I explained to you. I think we therefore have to try and overcome the societal narratives to try and get men into these roles. I think that's what all the affirmative action policies are fundamentally going to be trying to do. I think the easiest way for a government or a university or whoever is going to try and carry out these policies to do it is probably through trying to change the way these narratives are perceived, through advertising, right? By portraying these roles as something that is good for men to do. By going to boys' schools and running sessions about why going and doing these careers is a really cool thing for you to do. Maybe bringing in some male nurses to show that actually men can do these roles and have a really successful career and still be like real men. Okay, I thirdly think it looks like telling careers advisors and teachers to like have this in their mind that maybe they haven't been pushing men into these roles so much, and so when they see someone who's good at biology and chemistry, suggesting them that they might want to go and be a nurse instead of just going and doing chemical engineering. I think that's what affirmative action is likely to look like, because that's what's going to be effective, that's what's going to be relatively cheap. Okay, moving then to my first point on why we think we address worker shortages in these roles. Why do men now going to move into these roles? Because I think there is a large group of men who would be good at caring and good at these roles. I don't think there's necessarily a reason why we fundamentally have these caring men, which means I think there is quite a large group therefore that would be good at caring, that would be good at these roles, but don't go into this. I think we therefore manage to shift the decision-making calculus of a quite large group of men when they tell them that it's okay for them to go and do these roles. There's always going to be people sitting on the edge who are like, I kind of want to go and do a caring role, but societal narratives tell me not to. I think we shift a bunch of these people. Okay. Secondly, I think it's important to know that these jobs are actually pretty good. I think they are people-oriented. I think you get a bunch of satisfaction because you're able to help a lot of people. I think they're very stable roles, and there are lots of good things about them, but things that aren't emphasized because they have been neglected historically by society. Which means I think that when we run an ad campaign, when we tell young men about all of these good benefits, they're able to see that these roles are actually quite good, and so we get a quite large movement of men into them. Okay. I think this now means that we get a bunch of men into these roles, which I think solves the worker shortages in a really big way. Because you now just have a bunch more people who are willing to move into these roles, who are willing to go and be care workers and be nurses. I think this means that you are able to better staff these hospitals, etc. Okay. Note that I think that the worker shortages are the single biggest issue within these roles. Because the baseline working conditions of people in these roles is not that bad, but when you don't have enough nurses to staff all of your shifts, where you therefore have to be constantly working overtime, I think that is what drains these people and what causes them a lot of pain. I think this means that over time, as we make these jobs more desirable, as we make them matter more, as we get more men into them, they become better, we solve a bunch of these problems. I think this is good for all of the people in this role, men and women. Moving then to my second point on why I think we change the societal narratives that exist around caring. Okay, the context here is that caring is seen as feminine because that's what has been true traditionally, that's the roles that women have taken. I think this is reinforced every time that you see that your nurse or your care worker or your social worker is a woman, because it reinforces this idea. I think the change now is that labour and doing caring jobs is not uniquely feminist, right? I think this is firstly because there's now, you see these advertisements and you see these men who say, look, I'm a care worker and so I do care work, this is something that men do. I think it secondly is true because you now see lots of men who go and who are your nurse and who do all of this care work. But I think that it's thirdly true because we think that this is an exclusive solution because it's the only real way for government to try and affect these narratives, which means that even if the change this narrative is relatively small, I think it's still one that's very important because there isn't to be another clear way in which these actors can have a similar effect. Okay. What does this mean then? I think this means that we probably now have more men who understand that caring is something that they can actually do because they see other men that do this. Notice the reason that this currently isn't true is because if you grow up in a family, like many people do, where most of the domestic labour is done by your mother, is done by the woman in the house, if you then go to school where the majority of your teachers are women and then all of your interactions in society look like people who are doing the caring roles, who are teachers, who are social workers, who are nurses, also being women, I think this ends up in a world where all of the people who you see around you doing care work as a man are women. I think that means that uniquely, when you start to have these roles filled by men, that is a unique way that people start to see men also doing caring. I think the impacts of this is that men now no longer even in the smallest case, no longer just ask their female colleague to go get them a coffee. I think that maybe they do a larger share of the domestic work in their relationship because they see it as something that they can do. I think they started to push back against the narratives that are spread by right-wing manosphere people on social media that men can't do care work, men can't contribute to domestic labour. I think this is a huge impact because it affects a whole bunch of people in at every moment of their lives, because I think there are always dynamics between men and women, where women now benefit more because men take on more of these caring responsibilities because they have more emotion, they think more about the people around them, they do more to try and support them emotionally. I think this is really massive.
Sweet, I thank the speaker for their speech, and I'll now invite up the first speaker of the engaging team to start out their team's case.
before I start, can everyone hear me if I talk at this kind of volume? Nice. So, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Under the affirmative action model of the opposing team, they failed to accrue any benefits, as how are we going to change the entire societal model of masculine and feminine traditional roles in society by running a relatively cheap ad campaign? The systemic pressures that stop men going into these roles are much deeper seated than something that just a poster or just advertisements or just talks are going to change. There are already campaigns in process to get men to want to do these roles, and this has convinced the majority of people who are easy to convince to get into these roles already. So they cannot accrue any of their benefits based on the fact that their condition for affirmative action does not bring any more people into these roles. So, there are 3 main points I'll discuss in this speech to show you why affirmative action actually goes against the interests of both men and women in these workplaces and the men and women who will be getting care from these care professions and other professions that are female dominated. So, the first of this is I will discuss why the asymmetry exists and show you why this does not even address the main underlying issues in these industries. Secondly, I'll show you how this enables men who are potentially bad actors in these jobs from keeping them and work and being able to do things which are bad in these jobs, and how it doesn't actually reduce any of this. Thirdly, why men succeed in these industries already. The men who are good are already getting these jobs. They are already doing well in these industries, and that actually we're just helping the men in these industries rather than actually helping the woman. So, first I'll show you why there's an asymmetry in these roles. So, teaching, nursing, social workers, these are not the top level professions that are highest paid in society. Men are told to strive for jobs like doctors and engineers. This is a thing that we want, but we also want women to strive for these roles. We don't want the roles like doctors and engineers to become male dominated. We want to bring more women into these fields. These shouldn't be male fields, they should be just fields. And we believe that by doing this, we completely show that this is a better way to bring men into these female-dominated fields, because suddenly there are no male jobs, there are no female jobs. If men know that the jobs that are at the top have women in them, that is no longer a male job, that is for everyone. These jobs, this is a better way to show women that they can do better, and to show men that they are equal to women in this way. I'll take a POI.
Can you explain to me how getting women into STEM is going to get men into nursing?
Because, so, the traditional framing of these jobs, as I've explained, so engineering and doctors are often seen more as a male profession than a female profession. So men are wanting to strive for these traditionally male professions. So, by getting more females into this profession, we take this away, and this is no longer a male profession, it is just a profession. So men are no longer striving for jobs they view as a male profession, they are now looking for jobs which they enjoy. They have no incentive to go into these as a man, because there is no more incentive for that to be seen as a male job. It is now seen as a job for everyone, which in effect makes all of these other jobs start to look less like female jobs and more like jobs for everyone. So, and the other reason why this doesn't address it is it doesn't give a reason to properly apply for these roles. Men are often wanting to go into jobs for money. They want to have good status. By raising this profile of the job and making it look nicer, they're not going to make men want to do this. These jobs are innately just not wanted by many people. So this is a completely ineffective way of doing that. So, the next point on this is that how this allows men to get away with more in their jobs. If we are getting more men into jobs like social working and nursing and teaching, this is bringing more men into vulnerable fields where there are often a lot of women who feel very uncomfortable with men. This is especially a thing in teaching, where there is a much higher proportion of harassment, sexual harassment, and other such claims against men than women. So bringing in more men who traditionally are more or less unlikely to go into it because they are less fitted for these roles, as the ones who are already fitted for these roles and are good at caring, are good at doing all these things, are already going into these. We're just bringing people who traditionally would not like to do these things, who are not good at these things, into these jobs. And and if we look at this, we do not want this. We want the people who are most qualified and the people who like these jobs to do well, not just to go into it. And so, this means that we get more patriarchy reinforced things as we're getting more men in these workforces. And this just means that we do not get any of the benefits of the other side. And in fact, we are raising workplace discrimination and we are harassment. And this is also going to mean that that jobs that want to appear as balanced, they will then have an incentive to keep these men, as they will have to make sure that they are meeting the quotas and things like this that require them for these like affirmative actions. And so also, I'll go on to my next point. I'll take a POI though.
Why, excluding the societal narratives, are men inherently going to be worse at these jobs than women?
Because this is not a short-term thing to change. Often men don't want to go into these professions as they have been raised in different ways. We are not performing a societal change overnight. Men have been raised different, often aren't in these caring professions because they aren't seen as caring, and often women are much more emotionally intelligent than men. So bringing them into these caring jobs overnight isn't a thing that we can do. The opposing team is trying to say that putting up some posters and running an ad campaign is changing years, centuries of this patriarchy reinforced society. This is not the case. Men are still going to be following their traditional gender norms. This changes nothing. And this is why they cannot accrue any benefits on their side of the house, as they have yet to show us anything that shows why men and why this societal change is going to be so rapid and it's going to be relatively cheap, as their first speaker said. So, I'll talk about nursing and social workers. Women often don't want male nurses or male social workers as they have had bad experiences with men in the past and feel vulnerable, and the power imbalance that a male nurse causes to a female nurse is often very uncomfortable. Men often don't care if they have a male or a female nurse, as there is no same power imbalance. This means that in industries like nursing and like social working, women often prefer to have a female nurse over a male nurse, or a female social worker over a male social worker. So actually we don't want to bring many men into these roles, as the men we bring into these roles are unlikely to actually perform these jobs properly in the way that they are not going to be able to cover. They are not going to be able to care for these people in the same way, as there's not going to be the trust and the bond required for this relationship to work properly for caring. And so I'll move on to my last point. I'll give the opposing team a chance to repeat why if they want to.
Are you saying that because some men are more likely to abuse women in these roles, we should exclude all men from them?
No, we're not excluding them. Men have it easier getting into these jobs often actually. In teaching, a male teacher is far more likely to be taken, is quite likely to be taken over a similarly qualified female teacher. They are seen as more qualified in these roles, and so it's actually under the current system, a man who does just as well as a woman will get hired. There is no thing that is stopping these good men who want to do these jobs to get into these jobs. It is in fact the people who will be getting these are the less qualified ones, the less enthusiastic ones. They are not the ones we want in these roles. We want the people who are enthusiastic, who do care, and who are good at their jobs. And this segues me well to my last point, which is men still do better in these positions often than women. If you look at the higher levels of teaching, the deans, your principals, your vice principals, and your top level people in your school, they are far more likely to be men than women. Even in a female-dominated industry, men often dominate the top. This is doing nothing to address this, and we are just increasing the amount of men. This is not increasing the amount of balance in these workforces. It is not even addressing this. We are bringing more men into these industries, which are already supposedly female-dominated, but often the high level is dominated by men. The managers of social workers are often men. They do not need this help to get into these careers. And so, the opposing team is trying to tell you that through a short, relatively cheap ad campaign, they can change society overnight and make it so feminism is suddenly the norm and everyone is perfectly equal. How this is completely unfeasible, and we've shown you why this is actually negative for the case, and it is damaging to society, feminism, and gender equality. Thank you.
Sweet. I thank the speaker for their speech, and I'll now invite up the second speaker of the affirming team. we think it is absolutely ridiculous for the negating side to try and tell you that women are just more emotionally intelligent, therefore women should be nurses, and men are just like not emotionally intelligent and therefore should not be nurses, right? We think this is like kind of sexist, but, okay. In this speech, firstly, I will be dealing with this like bad actors point that we heard. We think this is the weakest point, and then we'll be dealing with the material we heard around working conditions, and then moving on to like moving on to barriers. Note that like, yeah, okay. Starting with the bad actors point, right? We heard this idea that because we're getting more men into these roles, that means we have a bigger opportunity for men who are bad actors to now get into these roles, to make women uncomfortable in them, or to like actually just be like really malicious, to have really malicious intent and like, you know, like sexually harass people they're caring for, stuff like that. Okay. Firstly, we think that this is not true because we think that truly, truly bad actors are symmetrical on both sides of the house, right? If someone is like has the intention of sexually harassing someone, they're not going to go into the care role like because we're like now campaigning for more men to be in these roles, right? We think that men can already just like take these roles and be bad actors, therefore we don't think this is a burden we have to take, right? Okay. And then this idea that like women will be uncomfortable if men are in these spaces. We just think this is like ridiculous, right? We think women are used to working with men. We think like most industries have men and women in them. We think that there is no reason why women who do these jobs will be more uncomfortable because a man is also now doing them. Okay. And then this idea that like men are not traditionally caring, and I'm going to be really generous here and assume that they're saying that men aren't traditionally caring because of the way society has been built up and not because of like some really sexist like stereotypes. Okay, we think that we get the change on our side of the house, right? We think we're telling men that it is okay for you to be emotional. It is okay for you to like empathize with someone, care for them, right? They've tried to characterize our change as like overnight change, and we can't get this. We're not getting overnight change for you, right? We're telling you that there is a group of men who probably are emotionally intelligent and are capable of doing these care roles. We just tell them that they can now do this, right? We tell them that it is okay for a man to be emotionally intelligent and take these roles. We are the only side that gets you any positive change on the narratives that plague our society. Okay, and then lastly on this idea that like men caring for like women in these like caring roles like are just like inherently like not a good idea. We don't think this is true, right? We think that maybe there's also space for us to say on our side of the house, the more diversity you have in care workers, the better, right? That means that any patient that goes into a hospital now has more chance of having a nurse that they feel represented by, right? We think that it is true that some men will just feel more comfortable if they have a male nurse that they find more relatable, that they're more comfortable with, right? And we think that we get a massive advantage on this too. Okay, now moving on to working conditions, and this is also where my split will be, right? Okay, the main idea that we heard is that there's a power imbalance between men and women, and then like we make women in this industry more uncomfortable, and therefore this is just like really bad for the women who are already in this industry, right? Okay, firstly, we told you at Thomas that the main problem in the care worker industry is just the shortage, right? We think the working conditions aren't absolutely hellish. The problem is that because there's not that many people doing these jobs, people in these roles are forced to do overtime, are forced to like not get paid that much for it because like, you know, you can't just like leave your patient. Okay. Therefore, we think we solve this problem because even if we are able to get like 10 more male nurses, that's really good. We tell you we're probably not getting 10, we're probably getting like thousands, right? Okay, so how do we make working conditions better for women in these industries who are already there? Okay, that is because, and this is my split around strikes and pay equity. Okay, the problem is these roles are not taken seriously because they're traditionally held by women, because like there's just this narrative that women are more caring, which the negating side is pushing on you, by the way. Okay, and what makes for this problem is the societal narrative that Thomas told you about. These are pink collar jobs, they like have less pay to begin with, and like any requests for pay equity in these jobs are not taken seriously because we're just like used to women not being paid that much. Okay, and then secondly, like this also means they're not taken seriously when the people in these roles strike or when they talk about improving their working conditions, right? And we also think they're just like not appreciated by society, and this in itself is a really, really big harm, right? And this is the reason these jobs are undersupported. So the solution is that we get more men into these jobs. They're not seen as pink collar anymore, right? Even if we don't get like millions of men into these jobs, we still like, because we're able to push this narrative that men can be in these jobs, they immediately become a little bit less pink collar, right? Okay.
we think that even as this change happens slowly, it is a massive, massive impact. The first myth is men now like work hard to become nurses, right? You have to get like a merit endorsement to like get into nursing school. We think that in itself, just men working hard to become nurses, we think that like this makes society see nursing as like a highly skilled job. I'll take that in a second. And then secondly, we don't expect women to like just silently do these jobs. We like give them appropriate leave, or we expect them to like get paid for their overtime, and we think this is a massive, massive impact. And then the outcome of this is that when these workers go on strike, when they talk about improving their working conditions, they are taken seriously. We think this is a massive, massive impact because these jobs are really, really important. A worker feeling slightly more supported in these jobs means that a worker is more capable of supporting the people that they care for, and this is a massive, massive impact on society. Okay, I'll take a POI now before I move on.
Everything you do has an immediate societal backlash. In society, there's a rise of extreme and far-right misogynist people. Do you think the conservative men who don't want to go into these jobs are going to listen to woke posters that tell them to?
We're just not concerned about conservative men, right? We're concerned about men who are like not particularly politically aligned in either way, that just like are pushed by the narratives that everyone in society is pushed by. We think any slight change regarding these narratives is good enough. And then like lastly, we think like feminism can't stop because we're afraid of the backlash, right? Like that in itself is just principally wrong. Okay, now moving on to the barriers that prevent men from getting into these jobs. We heard the main push is that like men will only take jobs that they get highly paid for, and then men see STEM jobs as jobs that they traditionally should do and therefore do them. So the only change that the negating side proposes is just like telling women they can go do STEM, right? We think this already happens, right? Like at the quiz last night, we heard that like 40% of STEM graduates were women. We think this number is going to keep increasing over time, right? We don't think that is the side that needs immediate change right now. What we do think needs change is that like we can't just have both men and women all competing for the same STEM jobs, right? We think that if men are told that if you are really good at science, yes, you can take a STEM job, but you can also go be a nurse. You can also like work in the hospital as a care worker, right? We think this is the change that we can actually get. We think the real barrier stopping men from taking these jobs are just like thinking that they can't take them, and this is where we make the change, right? We don't need men to think that they don't have to take STEM jobs. We just need men to think that they can take care worker jobs. We think this is really, really important. Okay, and then this like this material that we heard around low pay, right? We were told that like men are just told to strive for high paying jobs, and therefore we'll just like not do these care workers jobs, right? Okay. We think that people like sometimes just like take low pay jobs, right? We don't think everyone is constantly grinding to become Elon Musk, right? We think that is why we already do have teachers and nurses and construction workers, right? We think that people also like take into consideration whether they actually want to do something when they take a job. Therefore, we think if nurses aren't paid like $2 on the hour, we think that because they're paid like decently well, we think that men will take these jobs, right? Okay, and then lastly, just some recharacterization on what our affirmative action just looks like. Okay, they've tried to push on us that we can't solve everything overnight and therefore our action is useless. We don't think this is true because they get no change, and also we think that we do change this narrative over time, and that in itself is a big impact. Thank you.
Sweet. I thank the speaker for their speech. I now invite up the second speaker of the negating team to give their speech.
Before I start my speech, I'll just flag that the views expressed by the debaters in this debate don't necessarily express the views of the debaters themselves. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Their charitable view of women being better at emphasising than men just because of societal teaching is incorrect. I'm going to explain to you why A, this doesn't actually solve the societal barriers, and then also, like, remember my, think I said at the start about how evolutionarily women are going to be better at emphasising it than men. Then I'm going to move on to why their positive pushes are incorrect. Then I'm going to go on why their model fails, they can't accrue their positive benefits anyway. And then 4, I'm going to explain why more men is bad, even if they're able to accrue all their positive benefits and they're going to be able to get more men into the profession at all. But okay, firstly on to some characterisation why women are going to be naturally better than men. They tell you that because of societal teaching, this doesn't apply because they're going to be able to change the societal narrative. We just don't think this is the case. We think that a small governmental initiative, as framed by Michael, is probably not enough to be able to teach anything and change the entire societal narrative. We also think that society pushes back, it wanes, it goes up, it goes down. We think that generally just increasing this is also going to increase the amount of backlash that we hear from other organisations, like conservative organisations. They're going to see this thing that they don't like. They're going to see that this woke view of men also going to be able to go into caring professions is something that antithetical to their actual worldview. So they're going to be able to pour the amount of money that they have into the exact opposite drive to try and tell people that women should take the pink collar jobs and men should take the blue and white collar jobs. We think therefore that any benefit that they try to claim from an initiative that focuses entirely on just trying to convince people that being into these jobs is good for men isn't actually going to work because there's going to be just as much societal backlash, and it's unclear why their specific model is going to do any better than any of the models that is going to be taken by the people who are naturally going to oppose this, especially when those people have just more drive, they have more capital, etc. Okay then, why are also women just generally going to be better at emphasising this men? Because of evolutionary reasons. I'm not looking forward to this. I think that generally, evolutionarily, there's an incredible incentive for people who have the ability to work, have the ability to provide, are then going to be the ones who are going to be able to be the stronger people, especially because for the majority of human civilization and human existence, the people who are going to be able to provide are naturally the people who are going to be stronger, who are going to be more aggressive. We think that's naturally why men have evolved to be less good at caring, better at seeking out and attacking people and animals and stuff, and women, because they don't have the same physical strength as men, have been evolutionarily trained to be better and better at the caring roles. We don't think that's something that you can change overnight. We don't think that's probably something you can change at all. And it's just another characterization that I'll go into further about why getting more men into this job isn't necessarily a good thing. Okay then, on to what their positive pushes are and why I think their positive pushes don't work. They say that if they do get more men, they will accrue 2 main benefits. Firstly, people listen to the struggles that we hear from people, the pay goes up, the working conditions go up. I think the main thing that we can address this with, and I think this is pretty conclusive, is just the fact that the majority of the reason why these professions are paid badly is not just because women do them, it's because they are seen as caring professions. We think that the societal hardwire that sees women-based jobs like caring professions as being of lower value than men-based jobs is not something that can be male typical jobs. It's not something that can be fixed by just increasing the amount of men in there. We think there's societal hardwirings that when you see a job that is caring, even if it is going to be dominated by men, you value that less because society naturally values worldviews that are focused on trying to accrue a massive economic output or trying to lift a car or whatever, and people are going to assume those are more valuable to society whether women are doing them or not. Then they also say that there's just going to be more jobs. We think this is probably untrue, and I'm going to explain why they're probably not actually going to accrue more men here, which I was going to say I was going to do later, but I'm going to do now. Why do you not think you get more men on their side of the house? We think we explained this partially at Michael and partially at POI, and partially at the start of my speech, but we just think men don't like it, and generally people don't like it when they're told what to do by the government. We think that the society frames everything around not wanting to take what is easy, not wanting to go into a profession that they see as more caring and they see as less hard work. We think that even if you frame it in media as something that men can do, there is no way that you can actually change the narrative from being something that is a caring profession to being something that is naturally liked by men without about fundamentally changing the way that that profession actually works. We think that means that even if you do manage to get more men, the only reason that you've managed to get more men is because you've fundamentally changed the way the society views that profession from being a one in which is like really, really caring, which men aren't going to want to do for a whole reason of societal issues, to being one that is like less based on caring, that's more based on views that people see as like more masculine, which is going to fundamentally change the profession in a bad way, because then like the men who go into it are going to like not view it as a caring profession, they're going to view it as all the like other types of professions that they do, which is pretty like imperative why that's going to be bad. There's a reason there's caring professions. Okay then, like we've already explained why their model falls. We think that even if their model has like a slight increased benefit, firstly we're going to explain why any benefit they increase is naturally actually good for our side of the house, because more men in this profession is bad. But we also think we're going to explain why it's going to be like good for, we're also going to explain why it's going to be like good for our side of the house, because we think that like naturally their model is going to increase the amount of men who get in there who are going to naturally going to be harassing and naturally going to be bad because of the way their model works. Why do we think their model is going to like get less, why is it bad to have more men into the jobs? We think it's bad to have more men into the jobs because we think, as we explained it in Michael, there's like natural things where when you have a hierarchy structure, like you see in nursing, like you see in teaching, where you've got a teacher and a student, it's way, way easier to be able to like, to be able to manipulate that person. We think when you put a bunch of incentive on either gender, if you put any incentive for a school to think that it is better to have one gender over the other, we think suddenly all the times where people go up and say, look, this really, really terrible thing happened, the school now no longer wants to like kick out this teacher, they now no longer wants to do something that is negatively going to affect this teacher because it's going to look bad on them. So even if they are able to somehow change the societal worldview with an ad campaign, which they're obviously not going to be able to do, I will take that.
Do you think that both men and women have kind of like diverted from like the traditional roles that they've held like throughout our evolution?
I think they've diverted and I think they've come back. I think we see in today's society that they are increasing into a worldview that is more conservative. We think there are always going to be some woke men, but we think those woke men are going into teaching anyway, so we are unsure where their benefits actually accrue. But we think that like at the end of this debate then, what do you think you have to buy? I think you have to buy that their model is not going to work because their model is really, really small. No men is going to look at their model and think that that is going to be the thing that accelerates them into this profession. We think that there's going to be a response to this model which works in the exact same way they do, as a campaign to try and get less men into these jobs because naturally society pushes, society wanes. And we think that even if their model like works, their positive benefits are unclear because I don't think they can achieve their two benefits of pay going up and more jobs. And so I think like even if they're able to accrue those benefits, they still fail because having more men is bad, because then those men are given a special status where they're then able to harass more people because they're unlikely to be reported, and because we think women are naturally better at empathizing, which is why they are better in this role anyway. So proud to stand with them and to the side of the house.
I thank the speaker for their speech. Apologies, I'm just going to plug my computer in before we move on to the next speaker, but I invite up the third speaker of the affirmative team to continue their team's case. Sweet.
Just read my
main thing that we have left to do in this debate is prove that we actually get more men into these roles. I think this has been the main neg push, is that this is just like totally unrealistic with 2 posters. I think that 1, this is a bad characterization of what our model looks like, and 2, I think that their response has been inadequate. So I think that if we can build this back up, then this is like completely debate winning. So I'm going to start by talking about why we actually get more men into these roles, and then secondly I'm going to respond to their like only positive content, which is on like why men in these roles are going to be bad actors and make all the women uncomfortable. And then thirdly I'm going to talk about like then thirdly I'm going to talk about the like evolutionary stuff, and then fourthly I'm just going to like weigh all of our points. Okay, so firstly on why we get more men into these roles. Okay, I think that what we've told is that like, what we've been told by Neg is that like 2 posters isn't going to change anything. We think that, and that like the stigma is too strong. 1, we think that firstly like, Neg doesn't do anything about this stigma, but secondly I think that our model is actually beneficial. Why? Because I think that firstly we think that the narratives are broken down young. We don't think this looks like 2 posters in a hallway you never visit. We think that this looks like 1, like picture books showing that like male nurses as well as like firefighters. We think that this looks like talks at school, and maybe it's like some like buff nurse comes in and you're like, wow, he's so masculine, I really want to be a nurse too. And then like, or like thirdly, we think this looks like a change in the careers office where you're like, your careers supervisor tells you that maybe you should be a teacher because you're really good at engaging with other people instead of just going and like being a lawyer. We think that when men are like recommended to go into these fields, we think that this makes a big shift, especially when it's like personal and directed and like in their life. We think that like even if you think it's just an advertising campaign, we think that like ads are really effective. We think that this is why people spend like millions and millions and millions of dollars on marketing. We think that like when you see things all around you, we think that that shifts your perception of society. We think that running like even if you think it's just a mass marketing campaign, we think that this will be actually really effective because it like directly clashes with the stigma that you see, and we think that you don't actually see the stigma like that much in your everyday life. Okay, and then secondly, we think that like there is this like untapped market of caring men. We think that this is like the tipping point at which like these people like when they personally recommend it, when they see people in their lives telling them to go into these roles, they're like able to understand that this might actually be positive. We think that this is like there are men who are like naturally caring, and even if like maybe evolutionarily they're not, like we think that they like have their own personalities outside of their like evolutionary traits, and therefore like they might be personally good at caring even if like all men aren't. And we think that like thirdly like massively undermines the stigma. To like maintain the stigma you have to like separate these things. We think that like when you start seeing stuff that actively goes against the stigma in your everyday life, as in like males within these roles start coming in and talking to you at school, we think that like you're less likely to believe in it. We also think it like beats the like manosphere argument that they put forwards. Because we think that like there are already such heavy pushes by these male like manosphere influencers, like that like all women are caring. We think that like, and secondly we think that like not the men that we're trying to get aren't the ones who are listening to like Joe Rogan. We think that it's like, we think it's like very unlikely that these are the men that we're trying to like tap into. We think that like thirdly, you're not like no TV network is going to run a like anti-woman, anti-men in nursing campaign. We think that like our marketing is going to be much stronger. We think that this only really exists in like far right conservative online spaces. We think that like probably the men we're trying to get aren't in these spaces. But even if they are, we think that this message isn't as strong as like government funded marketing. I'll take the POI now.
You say that marketing is really effective. Do you think you can have the same budget for marketing as organisations like TPUSA that are backed by billionaire donors who are going to be catalysed by this woke movement?
I think that, again, like TPUSA, it's like only within this like very, very, very niche space. I'm pretty sure that like the men that we're trying to get at are not within this space. And I think that maybe that does deter like a small group of already conservative men who are never going to go into this space, and now they're like don't like male nurses. But I think they were never going to like male nurses, so I don't think that this is like that convincing. Okay, now on to like why having men in these jobs isn't bad. I think that this is the main like positive material push from NEG. I think that's like very not true. I think that like firstly they tell us like that like for the people within these jobs, or like people who are being cared for within these roles, this is going to be good. E.g., your like male teacher's going to abuse a student. One, we think like HR and like management still exists. We think that like they're not going to want like some child abuser within the role. We think that there are like relatively good regulations. We think that it's definitely still like possible to like fire men within these roles. We're not like setting a quota where they have to reach like 20%. I think that's not what this looks like. I think the schools value kids. I think that like there's still like facilities within these to be firing. I think that like even if you have a male principal, I'm pretty sure they don't want like child abuse going on within their school. I'm pretty sure the head of your like local like clinic doesn't want your patients being abused. Why? Because they get like backlash from the patients, from the parents of the school. We think that like it's much better to like not have abuse of the people that you care for than to have like one more worker. We think that it's very possible to still fire them. And we think that like the response, like society like naturally waxes and wanes, and they're never gonna like get this change. Isn't very true. I think that like it's not gonna be like immediate backlash. We think that like we are the ability that we have to like shift this narrative even a little bit is like real as soon as we get like actual men in these jobs. I think that we've proven that we do get that. I think it's very likely that we're able to like tap into like this market of men. Okay, now onto the like evolutionary stuff. I think that I've already semi-responded to this. One, I think that like even if you think that 80% of men are like these like hunter archetypes where they're like just want to like go and hunt meat all day. I think there's like still like 20% of men who like could be a good care worker. We think that like we have individual personality traits. We think that you can like low-key learn to care if you're like really good at chemistry and like would be a great nurse. We think that like you can develop these skills within the role. And like even if you think you can't, like I think that it doesn't require like being the most caring person ever to be a nurse. I think like low-key you don't have to be like the ideal mother figure to be a nurse. I think you just have to be like good at your job and like relatively like nice and caring and supportive. We don't think that like you need a woman to do this. We don't think this is like a uniquely feminine trait. Okay, now onto like the bad acting men. We low-key don't think, I think that like we don't think that women within these jobs are going to be uncomfortable. We think that these are still like, for at least like the short term, are going to be like female-dominated fields still. We think that like while we do get an increase in men, I think that like while they're like historically female-dominated, it's probably good systems in place within these jobs. We think that's like really actually, even if you think this is true at the end of this debate, we think it's like pretty marginal. If like we think it's like pretty marginal. We don't think this is going to be the tipping point at which women leave this workplace. We think that we can probably weigh this out. Why? Because we think that like there are resources in which like if they're facing abuse at work, that they can get that dealt with. We think that there are complaint systems. We think that these are like pretty effective, and we think that like that at the point at which you get a change and you get men within these roles, you're also more valued in society as we push with that Thomas. We think that you're just more likely to get more respect for them. We think you're less likely to get actually like abuse of the care workers themselves. We think that this is more debate winning. We think that this point about women feeling uncomfortable within these roles is very marginal. I think that we can weigh it out, but I also think it's just very unlikely. I think at the end of this, what should you believe? I think that you should believe our points that we give you at first, where we tell you that we make a positive change within these roles and we get more people in, and we think that we break down the societal stigma. We think these roles are valued more highly, and we think that not all care workers are seen as women. We think that the care is seen as a job that can go for both women and men.
Now invite up the third speaker for the gaming team to round up the substantive portion of this morning's debate.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1.
I think where the affirming team goes categorically wrong in this debate is assuming that simply an ad campaign can change deeply ingrained societal pressures that change the thought process of men when going into the workforce and force them into normally men-dominated jobs rather than going into care-working things. I think this is something that cannot be changed even over 20 years or multiple decades of ad campaigns. I think something more impactful needs to be done, and I don't think the opposing team does any mechanisms or impacting to actually show you why. Because of this, I think we show you more strongly. All right, 2 points of clashes within this debate. Why does not adding affirmative action lead to better quality of care work? And then why is it actually bad to get more men within these roles? Okay, the first point of clash. Why is it bad for having this affirmative action? It's going to be decreasing the quality of work. All right, so overall, we think that the men in these roles, by adding the affirmative action, there's going to be a larger incentive to keep them within the roles. Because of this, I think there's going to be a higher likelihood that these men are not going to be fired if they're doing small actions sexual harassment, this sort of thing. I think that even if you've got best case scenario, men that are doing these big sexual harassment cases are getting fired, I think you're still going to see an increase in the the overall scale of it, because people are going to be more accepting of it since they want to keep more men in these roles. This is mainly because what the affirming team is pushing, this ad campaign. I think while I don't think it's going to push people into these roles, I think it's going to change a societal narrative that they want more men into these roles. I think it's not going to actually change the fact men are going into the roles. I think it's going to make people want to try and do it, but I don't think that's going to be achieved. I think because of this, you're going to see more small sexual harassment cases get swept under the rug. In the status quo, this is already happening in a large amount. I think by adding the added pressure of what the opposing team is trying to add into the world is just going to increase drastically the scale of what is happening, and because of this, I think the overall quality of care work is going to heavily decrease. Why is this? I think being able to for these men to get away with bad doing their job badly or misconduct cases is going to overall make it so they're giving a worse they're going to be giving a worse quality of work. The opposing team has told you that men are already there's caring men in this world, and they're not going to do this. They want these people to go into these workforces. I think this is just symmetrical on both sides of the argument. I think these caring men, if you truly wanted them to be going into these workforces, these caring spaces, you wouldn't want them to have to you wouldn't have to want to motivate them to do it. I think these men are already going to be wanting to go into these workforces. The people you really want in caring workforces, which are dealing with extremely important things, such as social work, such as nursing, I don't think you want to have to motivate them. I think the best path of action here is to have the people who truly want to be doing these jobs. I think because of this, we show you that it's better on our side of the house not to push a societal narrative that's going to try and make them go into these jobs. Because all it is going to do is increase the acceptance of misconduct within these workplaces. Because of this, I think it's going to see an overall decrease in the quality of work. I think on our side of the house, we more aptly achieve a better quality of social work and nursing because we are not allowing and not letting it become more prevalent in society and in these workforces for this misconduct to happen. Because of this, I think it's much more important we do not try and push these societal narratives, which realistically are not going to increase the amount of men in the workforce. The only thing it is going to do is negative. It is going to make it so you've got more damage being done to the vulnerable people in these workspaces. As well as this, we told you earlier in the debate, we told you that men generally are going to be more aggressive. They're not going to be as caring as women. This is just something we have told you. There's been no pushback and no actual impacting or mechanisms to why this is not true. Because of this, I think we can agree on both sides of the house that women, they're generally going to provide a more caring opportunity for the people they're doing. I think the main driving factor behind this is the fact that if you've got a man treating a woman, there's a more likely chance of them being uncomfortable. I think because of this, the uncomfortable thing there is going to make it so there's a less quality of social work, because you've got someone who's overall a woman perhaps in social work, they've got a male therapist or something like this, like a counsellor, I think if they've been like gone through bad experiences, I think the possibilities of this could lead to like just a worse quality of work. I think overall our side of the house prevents this at a higher degree. Their side of the house does not because of this. I think we strongly win on this factor since we're overall going to be providing and having a better quality of like social and care work throughout the world. All right, I'll take the PO now.
Do you get a better quality of work when women are continuously undervalued and having to work overtime within these jobs, showing up to work tired, or when you have more workers within these roles being able to create a like solid support and work base?
I think this greatly leads into another point around this point of clash. By introducing this thing, like the opposing team has told you, by getting more men into these jobs, you're going to get more like appreciation for the jobs. I think this categorically goes against the point of their argument because they're basically telling you that we need men in these jobs to make them cared for. I think this is told throughout their whole debate. They've mentioned to you stuff like by introducing more men into these roles, it's going to make it so like overall there's more people doing the roles, but like it's going to make it so they're more cared for. I think the fact that we have to resort to getting men into the roles just shows that it like perpetuates societal narratives about the patriarchy, and because of this, I think we're like overall just doing horrible things by doing that. I think it's better on our side of the house. All right, on to the second point of clash. Why is it actually going to be bad to have more men in these roles? All right, so like, I think overall, it's going to just like, I think overall we're not going to like accrue any benefits from doing this. One of the main pushes of the opposing side is that we're going to be able to make like a narrative around like more men going into these jobs. I think we've already seen this within the world, and like for reference, Maliki mentioned this earlier in the debate, so this can kind of double like as responsive material, but like it's very prevalent within the world that with like DEI stuff, it's extremely common for like a lot of pushback from conservative narratives about this. I think we already see this like in the present day, in the status quo, because like if we have these DEI narratives of, as the opposing team says, like putting men as nurses in picture books, you're going to have the conservative movement, which within the world is heavily growing at the moment, working towards like giving you more stuff about that. They're going to push back on it more. I think that's going to make it so there's going to be a bigger divide in society because this thing, it's going to be increasing the amount of people who are like dissatisfied with the system. I think overall we're seeing a bigger switch towards like at the moment like a conservative viewpoint within the world. You're seeing more radicalization. I think the only thing that this is going to do is increase the amount of radicalization. I think Maliki previously is mentioning this because he's like mentioned conservatism is rising. Because of this, I think this can double as substantive points and substantive material, but majorly it is responsive. Because of this, like, I think I'm showing you clearly that it's going to be bad by forcing more men into these roles and like making a narrative around it. I think it's going to create more divide within the world. I think it's not going to be good because you're going to have this conservative pushback as we previously mentioned. Because of this, I think like it's much better to just keep it at the status quo. I think the best thing we can do, as Michael had previously mentioned in this debate, is just allow it for like women getting into other things. Then we can like get a better equality within the world. You're going to have like more people, more women in like other workforces. Because of this, I think we're very, very proud to debate. Well,
Sweet. I thank the speaker for their speech, and I'll now, as is customary, reverse the speaking order and invite up the leader of the negating team to give their reply.
Speech in 3, 2, 1. I think this entire debate becomes an absolute wash and we win on cost, as we stated at second and third. Why is it a wash then? This is a wash because their model doesn't work at all. They aren't able to prove a significant difference. Even if they aren't able to prove that they're going to be able to overcome the backlash that we see from conservative movements. The fact that they aren't able to get a significant amount of men therefore undermines their positive pushes on better pay and more workers. And even if it's not a wash, even if we do get way more male workers, we still prove that this is bad and we still win because more men is bad, as we explained, as it's gone relatively unresponded to. Okay, why does their model not work? They come up at first and explain that their model is going to be a campaign. They do storybooks and like advertising, explaining why, yay, this is really great, you should be a male nurse. Note throughout this debate, it's unclear why society is going to adopt these things as like the literary canon. As we explained at Max, it's really, really, really hard to get things in to people's mind. It's really, really hard to say, hey look, this is the campaign, you should buy it. You should assume that because this storybook tells you something, the storybook that no one's really heard of, you should therefore be a male nurse. It's really, really good to be a nurse. We also are unclear. We explained to you throughout the debate that we're going to be able to see pushback from conservative movements. As we explained at Max, these conservative movements are smart. This probably isn't just going to look like pumping out like TikToks about why like Joe Rogan is great and clips from podcasts. This is going to look like intelligent marketing that presumably they're able to achieve on their side of the house, so it's unclear why we're not able to achieve it on ours. Therefore, we think that their model achieves basically no increase of men. We think is outweighed by any increase they achieve, is outweighed by the negative pushback from the side that doesn't like this increase of male nurses, so therefore we think all of these points drop out of the debate. Note then that we also give you reasons why better pay and more workers doesn't apply. We tell you that pay is a systemic issue about how people undervalue pink collar workers, not just because they undervalue women, and as we've said before, it's such a small increase, therefore neither of their positive pushes really matter. Okay then, why, even if they are able to accrue more men into this work, why do we still win this debate? We win this debate because it is bad if they get more men into these jobs. We give you two main reasons, one which was left basically entirely unresponded to, other than that it was sexist, which is that women are going to be generally more empathetic. We give you multiple mechanisms for this. We give you a talk about evolutionary biology. We talk about societal systemic issues. We explain why having a higher percentage of women, so you're more likely to be seen by someone who is significantly more empathetic, is good. We also explain why men have more of an ability to manipulate. We explained to Max and Michael that if you are able to, well, mostly Max, sorry, if you're able to change the systemic view that having more men in your workplace is good, you must also necessitate that you're changing that view amongst the hospitals, amongst the schools. We explain at Max that this is going to mean that schools and hospitals value men more and therefore don't want to listen where they hear stories of harassment, where they hear stories of manipulation. We also explain why men are just more inherently able to manipulate than women are, because they have stronger stature, because they're more intimidating, etc., etc. We think generally, even if they're able to prove a significant enough increase in men, we still win, because an insignificant increase in men doesn't work. We think then that if they are not able to accrue for more men to a significant standard, as we show you that they're not able to do, this debate comes down to, as we said at me and we said at Max, and we said at Mike, this is going to cost a reasonable amount of money. Either it's cheap, as we thought it was at Michael, or it costs a lot of money. Therefore, this debate comes down to what do you buy more? A couple more male nurses, which probably won't even happen, who are going to be less empathetic and more able to manipulate, versus way more money in the coffer that you're able to put into other things. We think the second should be way higher. Thank you.
Sweet. I'd like the speaker for their speech. I'll now invite up the leader of the affirmative team to round out this morning's debate.
Let's do a little bit of thinking about actually who's going to be impacted by narratives. Because if I am someone in charge of running a hospital, what's the most impactful narrative going to be on me? Probably one that tells me that sexual abuse inside my hospital is quite bad. Probably one that tells me that people will care if I let people get away with it, that I'm probably going to lose my job. Similarly, ages. I don't think it's a massive leap for you to make, for you to believe that the people sitting on the spectrum of wokeness who are the men who are possibly going to go into care workers are probably more influenced by narratives that are pushed inside their schools, that are pushed by the government, that are pushed on the media platforms that they actually look at, which we told you are not going to be pushing the narratives pushed out by Joe Rogan. I think you're going to be far more affected by these narratives. I think we pretty clearly win this debate. Okay. Firstly, I think it's important to note here that largely most of NEG's positive material, that of like men not being very good carers and men being increased number of bad actors, inherently scale with our ability to get men into roles, right? I'm going to explain to you why, no matter how many men we get into roles, that's always going to be weaker than the societal narrative we get, but the only separate content that they have is firstly the cost, which, like, only came out at Leaders 1, but 2, we can find some money somewhere. Ads aren't that expensive. I don't think there's any good reason for you to weigh this up. The other piece of positive material they have that isn't contingent on actually getting men into roles is the idea that suddenly now, like, people running the hospitals and people running the schools are going to be more accepting of men who do bad things. I think I told you this in my introduction. I think we've given you a bunch of reasons why these people care quite a lot about making sure that people don't do abusive stuff inside their hospitals and inside their schools, why this is definitely going to be stronger than any narrative that tells them that, like, maybe we should try and refute a few more men, because this is actually the thing that's right there in front of them that's concrete, that they know that they probably, like, might go to prison for negligence if they ignore. Okay. With that out of the way then, I think that all of the outcomes from here scale based off how much we're able to get men into more roles. This is my first question. Do we get men into more roles? No, but I think we've given you a bunch of different ways how this happens really well. I think that it's pretty clear that there just, like, is a group of men who are able to be influenced by this. I think notably that these group of men are not the people who are going to be absorbing all of this backlash, but we've also told you that most of this backlash already exists, because Joe Rogan is already shouting as loud as he can that you shouldn't go and do women's issues. I'm not actually clear why they're particularly going to be galvanized in this case to direct a bunch more resources towards this than they're already able to do. Okay, I think this means that we do necessarily get a bunch of men into roles because they are able to be directly affected by this narrative in places where it actually matters to them. I think, secondly then, how do these men act? I think we've told you that the men are probably quite good at it. I think we told you that people are more than just their genes, and thus there are going to be men who are going to be caring. Note that I don't think these people are being forced into these roles in the way that it was characterised you at Third and at Leaders by NEG, because these people, as we told you, have already societal narratives telling them not to. I think they would, like, naturally be very good at these roles, but there is a thing that is preventing them from entering them. I think that we start to erode and to correct some of that to stop this distortion, which is why I think these people are going to be very good at caring. Also note they don't have to be the best carers in the world. Okay. Next, on abuse, I think I told you that people have a strong incentive to stop it. I think there are lots of, like, programs and systems, as we told you, that schools are able to do to manage this. Finally, on this idea of women being uncomfortable with a male nurse, I think we, like, gave you pretty good responses here that women are largely comfortable with men in every other situation. I don't see an exclusive reason why. We also think you can just, like, ask for a female nurse if that's going to be a massive issue. I also think this is going to be a minority. Also, on the abuse stuff, note that Adges, I think you probably believe that there aren't that many abusive people in the world, because otherwise we would all be getting abused all the time. Like, that is just inherently going to be a very small group. As big as these outcomes are, like, I think that it's always just going to be a very marginal amount of change compared to the number of men that we managed to get in. And I think that for all of the reasons we've told you, that's going to be really, really great.
Sweet. I thank the speaker for this speech, and I thank everyone for really wonderful speeches. This was a great debate. I invite you to cross the floor, shake hands, and I'm going to turn off the live stream, and we're going to head outside and let the panel discuss.
Just flagging, we have a panel. Please don't expect the result in less than 15 minutes. Feel free to go get some fresh air or something like that.
I'm really sorry that I